Mindset Mavericks, your blueprint for bold thinking and boundless growth.
Welcome to Mindset Mavericks. Have you ever dreamed of writing a book? And most people have. I know I'm certainly one of those. But what happens when the reality of publishing doesn't match the dream? So today we're talking to Terry Whalin, a guy who's been in the trenches of book publishing for decades. He's worked with hundreds of authors and has seen firsthand the biggest mistakes they make, especially when it comes to expectations. Terry's written a book called 10 Publishing Myths, where he lays out all the false beliefs that trip authors up, and more importantly, what they should be doing instead. So whether you're writing your first book or trying to figure out why your last one didn't take off, this episode's for you. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
John, great to be here with you. Thank you.
So as I touched on, you've been in publishing for a long time now. What I'd love to do is go back to a bit of your journey really and find out to what first got you into publishing and were you always passionate about writing?
Yeah, John, that's a great question. It was actually in high school that an English teacher noticed something about my writing and encouraged me to join the high school newspaper. So I did that. They put me in on the sports desk, which, I'm kind of a non-sports person. So it was a challenge for me to learn just the lingo and how to write all that stuff. But ultimately, I became the editor of my high school newspaper. And then I decided to go into journalism because I was interested in that. So I went to Indiana University, which has one of the top 10 journalism schools in the country. I thought I was really a good writer, so I joined the campus newspaper. It was kind of a big deal. There were about 100 of us on the writing staff. We put out a full-size newspaper 6 days a week. And my editor at the newspaper had me rewrite my story about 5 times before he finally published it. And I think it was like 3 paragraphs. It didn't even have my name on it. And so I quickly learned that I had a lot to learn as a writer. And basically back then we pretty much, blew off our classes. We were writing stories. That's what it was all about, was trying to learn how to tell those stories and get them done. This is in the pre-computer days. We were sitting at our old Royal typewriters, shoulder to shoulder, banging out our stories. And I joined a social fraternity. The Indiana campus has about 30,000 on the campus. And so I joined an active social fraternity. My journalism colleagues thought I was a little nuts because instead of becoming a newspaper reporter, which is what we're all training to do, I joined this group called Wycliffe Bible Translators. And so I spent first 10 years out of college in linguistics. And I lived in Guatemala, Central America. That's why I have a New Testament on my shelf from the Southwest Cachiquel people from that effort. But I wandered back to my writing. I started going to writers' conferences, started writing for magazines. That's always a great way for people to get started, to write for magazines. And I was at one of these writers' conferences, and I met an editor, and we went out walking, and she said, "I have a problem, Terry." I'm like, "Okay, what's your problem?" She said, "Well, I'm a children's editor at David C. Cook, and we're supposed to tell kids how they can do something in the world with their lives to reach people for Jesus. What kind of ideas do you have?" Well, at the time, my kids were small, and I was reading a lot of kids' books to my kids. And I realized that Steve Lawhead, he writes by Stephen Lawhead in the fantasy area, but he'd written these kids' books called Howard Had a Hot Air Balloon, Howard Had a Spaceship. It combined real pictures with a cartoon character so kids could get into it from the imagination standpoint. And I said, what if we took our real pictures around the world from Wycliffe Bible Translators, combined them with a little cartoon character to show kids different occupations? She said, "Oh, that's a good idea, Terry. Write that up and send that to me." So I made a little note. I went home, wrote it up, and then that wasn't my manuscript. I mean, it took a lot of work back and forth before that actually happened, but that became my first book that was published in 1992. This little children's book I did called When I Grow Up, I Can Go Anywhere for Jesus. And that's sort of what launched me in the book area, but I still have a lot to learn about how books work, and I'm still growing in that whole area.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a fascinating journey. And Yeah, really interested in how your writing things has developed and changed over those initial few years. I know that you've worked both as a writer and an editor. So how's wearing both hats shaped your perspective on publishing?
Yeah, being an editor did give me a whole different perspective. I mean, I'd written a lot of books for traditional publishers, gotten advances, all that kind of thing, but I'd never worked on the side of the editorial side about it. How do they make their decisions? How do they find a good one? All those kinds of things I didn't have any idea about. So, actually, out of my own frustration, years ago, I wrote this book called Book Proposals That Sell because I wasn't getting the kind of submissions that I wanted. And a book proposal is really a document. It's more your business plan as an author. And I think every author ought to write their book proposal because that shows who you think your audience is, what you're going to do, who's your competition. You sort of put all that down in writing. And I wrote this book years ago called Book Proposals That Sell, 21 Secrets to Speed Your Success. That book has about over 150 five-star reviews. People have used it to find an agent, get an advance, all kinds of things. But publishing's changed a lot through the years. And so a few years ago, I did a revised edition of this book and totally updated my old book. And so that book, the revised edition, is out there. You can get my ebook version of my book for free if you go to bookproposals.ws for website, bookproposals.ws. That takes you to a page where you can see the cover, see a little bit about the book, and there's this button that says free book. And you can get it in whatever version you want, the full book. One of the reasons I give away my book, you may think that's a little nuts to give away an electronic book, but I give the full book away because at Morgan James, we've learned that if you get my ebook and start to read that ebook, there is a high probability that you're going to turn and buy the print copy of the book. My giving away my ebook, I don't lose anything. Basically, I'm driving print book sales by doing that. But that book proposal is a very important document for every author, whether you self-publish or whether you go with a traditional publisher, just to have a game plan and know what your plan's going to be and how you're going to execute that, no matter what your publisher does.
So in terms of the book proposal then, are there key things that you think should be included in that book proposal? What's the purpose of it?
Well, it's essentially your business plan because every author thinks that everybody's going to read their book, and that's not really true. Every book has a primary readership and a secondary readership. So who is your audience and how are you going to reach those people? What are you going to do? Sure, your publisher is going to put the book out there, but their interests are really divided because like the first publisher I worked for, they published 60 books a year. And at Morgan James, we publish about 200 books a year. So our interests are really divided as far as the reach that we have. But you as an author have passion for your book and you have an audience to reach. So that book proposal helps you kind of shape that, understand that you have to take your own responsibility to get the book out there. What kind of ideas do you have? And you put those down concretely so you know that when the book comes out, you have to do your work to reach that audience.
I think you've touched on one of the misconceptions there that people have when they go to publish a book, and that's that everyone's going to buy their book, everyone wants to read it. But what are some of the other common misconceptions that authors have about publishing and writing books?
Well, there's a lot of them. Like one of the keys is that my publisher will market and promote my book. Sure, they're going to do some, but really you as the author have the primary responsibility on that. Another misconception is that my book will make a lot of money. Everybody thinks that no matter what they do, it's almost like the Field of Dreams movie with Kevin Costner. If you build it, they will come. People think that if they write a book, it's got to sell. It's got to make me a lot of money. Well, that could be true, but not necessarily true. There's a lot of books that get written that get out there and maybe sell 100 copies in the lifetime of the book. So you've got to be doing your part. My wake up moment actually in that whole book production area happened in 2007. I was a literary agent back then. Had a small literary agency in Scottsdale, Arizona. Mark Victor Hansen, the co-author on Chicken Soup for the Soul, had this event out in Los Angeles called Mega Book Marketing University. He invited me to come, so I took pitches from authors during the event. But John, I also decided to sit there with everybody. There were 400 people there, and listen to the different speakers. At that point in my life, I'd written about 50 books for traditional publishers. I'd been getting advances. Publishers were making pretty books. They were getting them in the bookstore, all that kind of thing. But when you're in publishing, usually once a year, maybe quarterly, the publisher will send you a financial statement about how your book is selling out there. Well, all of my statements were in the negative category. I wasn't selling any books. And I couldn't figure out what in the heck I was doing wrong in that process. It was almost like I'd been asleep and I woke up during this event, because about halfway through, I realized how little I was doing myself to be telling people about my own book. Sure, I had a terrywhalin.com website, but I was doing almost nothing else to be telling people about the books that I was writing. One of the speakers at this event was Jack Canfield, the other co-author on Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Jack has written this book called The Success Principles, about what does it take to really be successful in whatever you're doing. And the very first success principle says that I will take 100% responsibility for my own success. Now, none of us want to take 100% responsibility. We want somebody else to do it. We want some editor, some marketing person, some publisher, please, somebody other than us. But I decided during that event that I was going to take 100% responsibility for my own success. And so back then I started blogging. So in 2004, I launched my little blog. I write a blog article every week. And I've been doing this since 2004. So I have 1,700 entries in my blog. There's a lot of content over there. About a year ago, I have this little thing that searches for my name on the internet, and found an article that listed the top 27 content producers out there. And, Seth Godin, Ryan Holiday, Jeff Goins, people like that. And it had my name among those 27 people. They say there's 600 million blogs out there. So, that I got listed in this article, I couldn't believe it. But it's because I've been writing to my audience every week, and I do it, like clockwork. And that's one of the keys, I think, is figuring out what your pattern is, and then doing that over and over. People forget, even the co-authors on Chicken Soup for the Soul, they were rejected over 160 times before they finally found somebody to publish their book. That's a ton of rejection. And so they finally found this little publisher in Florida to publish the first Chicken Soup for the Soul book. They told their publisher they were going to sell 1 million books in the first year. Their publisher laughed at them. They'd never sold 1 million copies of anything. They thought that was ridiculous. It took those guys a year and a half to sell their first 1 million books. But they practice what they talk about, and it's a good idea for every author. They practice what they call the rule of 5. So they got up every day and they did 5 things to be telling people about their book. So they did a podcast or a guest blog post or a magazine article or a live event or a newspaper article. There's dozens of things that you can do, but they did 5 things every day, and their book took off. And so now those Chicken Soup for the Soul books are some of the best-selling books in the English language. It's incredible what these guys have done, but people forget they did a lot of hard work in order to actually get there and make that happen.
Yeah, that's a great accolade to be alongside some of those names as well. Like say Seth Godin, that's great to be featured alongside him. And you've just touched on one your books. They were kind of negative; they weren't selling at the time. So, what specific things did you do to turn that around?
Well, blogging was one thing for me, but I've also, I've done radio. When social media came along, I started doing that. So, I have 175,000 followers on X, Twitter. I ignored those LinkedIn invitations for a long time, but then I started accepting those. And I have 19,500 connections on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter that I put out. There's a lot of different things that authors can do. You just have to figure out what path is going to be the best for you. These other platforms like X or Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn, those are great platforms. But what authors really don't think about is that all those are what we call rented platforms. I don't control YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. I could intentionally or unintentionally violate their terms, get kicked off tomorrow from those things. So I always encourage authors to build their work on something they can control. I mean, we can control our own website, our own newsletter, our own actions. So don't build it over on somewhere else and then suddenly lose all that because you get kicked off.
And like I say, it happens frequently. Do something inadvertently and you get kicked off. So, I think that's great advice there. We did also touch on one of the kind of misconceptions, which is that it's going to make you money if you print this book and it's going to bring in all of this cash. But can we break down the actual numbers a little bit when it comes to book sales? So what should an author be expecting in terms of monetary gain from writing a book?
Yeah. Well, one of the things you gain, for example, is you become an authority in your topic, whatever that is. So that book can open new doors in your life. People will hire you for events. You can be a speaker. It can open a lot of doors for you if you have a book on a particular topic. So that's a good reason to write a book. In terms of numbers, in the publishing world, if your book sells 5,000 copies during the lifetime of the book, that's a good number. You should feel good about that. On the self-published side, maybe 100, 200 copies that you'll sell. But it all depends on you and your activity and how you do that. Publishers are always interested in your social media numbers and that kind of thing. And it's not that lots of books are sold through social media. But one of the things that we've discovered in the book publishing world is that somebody has to hear about your book 8, 9, 10, 12 times before they actually decide to buy it. So part of what you're doing on social media is just that exposure to your book. And it's not a button that says buy my book. Nobody cares about that. But when you get out on social media, you want to emphasize the benefits of what people are going to gain by reading your book. So, for example, I wrote this biography on Billy Graham a few years ago that's still out there. I'm still promoting that book every day. But what I'm promoting different radio interviews that I've done. A lot of them I recorded live. I've got those interviews stored over on my own website so they don't disappear, but I'm giving that link. So if you do a live event today, or if you did a live event 5 years ago, it still sounds live when people listen to it. So it's like, why not? Why not be still telling people about that? And it gives you more exposure. It's just a matter of thinking through it and using your time wisely, but yet doing the work to get the book out there.
Yeah, no, again, some great advice there. And I think one of the things I'm interested in when we're talking about your audience as well, which is kind of building your brand to help seller books, is if you're talking about your audience and who the audience is, do you tailor your writing towards, for example, one specific individual you're thinking about and got in mind, their kind of avatar, or how do you go about targeting the correct audience?
Yeah, well, that's a great way to do it, to have that person in mind as you write the book. The other thing that you can do to sort of find your audience, and a lot of people don't think about this, but it's to write for magazines. I mean, I've written for more than 50 magazines over the years. I've been a magazine editor. everybody wants to write books, John, and I totally get that. Books are permanent, but books are long. I mean, typical 200-page book is 50,000 words. A novel, 80,000 words. That's a lot of work to put that together. So a magazine article is like 1,000, 1,200 words. And so if you write a magazine article, you learn how to write a good headline, how to have a good beginning, how to have a beginning, middle, and end, how to have a single point to your magazine article. And with a magazine article, it's very easy to reach 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 people with your magazine article. So you can learn a lot about how in the world to reach your audience in that process. And you also build up publishing credits. I mean, those of us that are in publishing, it's kind of a catch-22, but we want to publish people that have been published. And so we want to see that you've got some experience with your audience and some way to reach them. And so that's a great way to get that experience. And, if you write not 15 to 20 articles on different topics, but related to your topic area and subject, those can be chapters in your book. I mean, that's another way to get your book writing done. You were telling me that you've partially written your book. Well, that's one of the ways to test your audience in the magazine world, but also build your presence in the marketplace, because every one of those magazine articles at the end will say Terry Whalin, author of 10 Publishing Myths, insights every author needs to succeed.
I love this piece of advice, and exactly what you've said. I've been trying to write a book and kind of going quite hard on it to try and make sure it's finished. But I have just recently started trying to do magazine articles as well. So one for Authority Magazine, Vitality Digest, another one's coming out for business.com shortly. But for somebody who's trying to get that experience, what's some good ways to try and get into these magazines if you're not a well-known person, you haven't published before? Do you have any tips for trying to get those first articles published?
Yeah, that's really a good question, John. These magazines, the editor basically tells us what they're looking for. And they have a thing they call guidelines, editorial guidelines. So no matter what magazine it is, you can search for their editorial guidelines, read those, and the editor will tell you what they're looking for. And almost every magazine will take what they call personal experience stories. I mean, all of us have strange, different personal experiences. So I always encourage authors to write those up into a magazine article and then see where they can get it published. There's a lot of places that'll take those articles. And that's a way you can get experience, but also you can build your brand, reach your readers. There's a lot of great things that can happen just from doing these magazine articles over and over.
So really keep plugging away, keep doing what I'm doing, and it should hopefully start leading to some audience and finding my place in the publishing space. Or certainly give me a bit of experience.
It will. The reality is a lot of people give up too soon in the journey. They don't understand that all of us in this business, it takes perseverance and persistence and consistency, all those things that none of us like really at the end of the day, but we have to do it in order to really get our stuff out there. I mean, Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield probably didn't like getting rejected over 160 times, but what they talk about is that whenever they got rejected, they used one word to encourage themselves forward. And that word is next. So it's like, well, this didn't work over here. Where's the next opportunity? So they didn't tuck their submission into a folder that they stuck in their desk and didn't do again. They sent it right back out to somebody else. And so that's a type of strategy that all of us can use, because let's face it, there's a lot of rejection that goes on in this business. We hear no a lot, But one of the ways you can keep looking for that yes out there is just to use the word next. This didn't work. Where's the next one?
That's a great little mindset tip for resilience. And going to stick with some of the myths as well that we have been talking about. I know you've written about things called mythbuster actions. Can you explain what those are and how they help authors?
Yeah, in each chapter in my book, John, I really intentionally tried to help authors understand something practical that they could actually do and achieve. I know from being in publishing a long time, there's a lot of the publishing process that is totally outside of my control. I can't do anything about a lot of these things. So I really tried in these Mythbuster actions to encourage authors of the practical things that they can do. Like, I can't control YouTube, but I can make my own newsletter and then send that newsletter out to my readers on a consistent basis. I mean, all of us start our newsletter list small, and so we have to grow that. And one of the ways you grow that is by your own consistency and people knowing that, hey, you're going to get a newsletter from me once a week or once a month or whatever it is, but do it on a pattern that's consistent.
Well, I'm sticking with the marketing theme of newsletters. Is there an underrated strategy that you think authors should be using?
Yeah, I think it's underused, newsletters, but in the publishing world, we consider those newsletter subscribers almost your gold standard of the type of people that you should be reaching, because if you have thousands of people on your newsletter list, those are the people that you want to be telling them that you're writing a book and where they can get it directly from you or what they can do. I mean, even my 10 Publishing Myths book here, John, I've set up a site. So if your listeners today go to publishingoffer.com, just publishingoffer.com, that'll take them to a site where they can get this book for like $10, including the shipping, and along with over $200 worth of free bonuses that I give them. They can get it directly from me. So that's just another thing that any author can do to actually encourage people to go and get their book at the end of the day.
Yeah, I liked how you suggest earlier that by giving stuff away for free as well, you can actually increase your sales. So is there other tips like that you can suggest that have really helped with your sales?
Yeah, every one of us need to do like what they call a lead magnet. So, it could be a chapter of your book. It could be a magazine article that you've written. It could be a audio that you've done. Figure out how you can give that away simply and easily to get people on your newsletter list. So, for example, for my 10 Publishing Myths book, when I was gathering the endorsements for this book, Alice Kreider, who's an acquisitions editor, told me, she said, "Terry, you're missing the 11th myth." I'm like, okay, what's the 11th myth, Alice? She said, well, the 11th myth should be that if I send my book to Oprah Winfrey, she'll book me on her show. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a pretty big myth, Alice. And what I decided to do, John, is I decided to go ahead and write that chapter when I was writing the book. We designed it to look exactly like the rest of the book. And now I give that chapter away. So if you go to Terry Links, plural, terrylinks.com/myth, 11th myth, that'll take you to a page from me where you can put your first name and your email address in there, and you get this chapter for free from me. There again, you get on my newsletter list if that happens. So that's a tool that I'm using, and that's an idea that you could take for your book, too, to write an extra chapter that's not in your book. Give it away.
Lots of little tips here to try and encourage those listeners and build that audience, which is fantastic. I know one of the questions I've had myself while I've been looking into writing a book and going through this process is having that internal debate about traditional versus self-publishing. What's your take on it, and can you see pros and cons to both?
Yeah, basically, I usually tell people there's actually 3 different ways to get published. Self-publishing is the way a lot of people are going. It's quicker, but you can spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time in self-publishing and produce a poor product. I mean, there's some really poor self-published books that are out there. So you got to be careful. I usually encourage people to type the name of the publisher that's pitching them along with the word scam or complaints into Google, see what comes up. I mean, every publisher has people that don't like them. I mean, even at Morgan James, we've been around over 20 years. We've sold 20 million books, produced over 6,000 titles. So we have a huge track record of success with our books, but there are people that don't like us and their stuff is out there forever, but there's not pages and pages of complaints. If you do that process and find pages and pages of people complaining about somebody, that should be a red flag for you not to go with those people. But there are some really great self-publishers out there. And then I've been involved in traditional publishing, but you get no a lot over there if you do that kind of thing. You've got to often have an agent to get anybody's attention. In the middle is this group called independent publishing. And Morgan James, for example, is one of the top independent publishers out there. Amazon is a big customer of Morgan James, but they're only 24% of our overall business. So the way I look at it, you publish with Amazon, which anybody can do, you're missing 76% of what we do for the book. We even sell in the United Kingdom, in the bookstores over there where you are, John. We print in the United Kingdom, we print in Australia, we print in the United States. So distribution is a big part of the benefit that you get from going to somebody like us at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things I've found looking into it is, like I say, just how difficult it can be to get distributed into the right places. I think that's definitely one of the advantages of traditional publishing. And you've mentioned one of the biggest mistakes there around trying to find the right publisher is people not really doing the research on the publisher, having a look at bad reviews. Are there other mistakes that people can look out for or things they should be looking out for when they're searching for a publisher?
Yeah, I often encourage people to speak to some authors that have been published in that particular place. Maybe order a book or two. I've had authors that have done that. They get the book and they go, "Ooh, I don't think I want my book to look like this." But do your own due diligence there to actually make sure that that's going to be the right place for you at the end of the day. Some are and some aren't. I mean, there's some people doing some great work and there's some people that'll just, take $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of your money.
You've written a lot of books now as well. So you've got a lot of experience of actually writing books and getting your books published and making sales. But in terms of the actual writing experience, what tips can you give people for somebody who's got an idea in their head, they're desperate to start writing a book, they've wanted to do it for a long time but haven't actually started typing on the keyboard yet? What's some good steps to make sure they do actually execute their plan and do it well?
Well, I think, doing it consistently, having maybe a short goal. Maybe you're going to write 500 words a day or 500 words 3 times a week. Get up an hour earlier, stay up an hour late, do it on your lunch hour, but do it and do it consistently. And it's like my blogging, for example. I blog every week, and that's an article. And if you blog consistently, those could be chapters in your book. So it's all a matter of looking at your material and seeing how you can take that material and organize it into something that can be a book at the end of the day. There's not one way to do it. I mean, some people love using their phone and they orally tell their stories and it turns into type, and then they start editing on that. I've had novel friends that tell their whole novel using a tape recorder or using their audio, but then they edit from that. You just have to look at the tools that you have right there in front of you and then start to use those consistently and effectively.
And really, it's just so many tools available now, whether it's to help writing and planning a book or particularly with AI coming in now. And I'm interested to hear your take on how AI is affecting the writing and publishing industry, because it's got huge implications across all different industries. but I can imagine particularly it's difficult to filter out what's human generated and AI generated.
Yeah, it is. You can pretty much tell. You don't want to write your book using AI, but AI is a good research tool for you. You can use it to analyze your competition, for example. Break down how in the world did they put this together? Who's their audience? Who are they reaching? Those are all good AI questions to ask. And I think the more you train your AI to give you specifically what you're looking for, the better results that you'll get. And as I understand it, Apple is working on taking pure text from a book and changing that into audio for audiobooks. I mean, everybody loves audiobooks. I like listening to audiobooks. But from the publisher's standpoint, they're very expensive to produce and not really profitable. I mean, we've produced over 6,000 titles at Morgan James. And sure, we have some audiobooks, but I would say annually we only make maybe $4,000 audiobooks. So it's not like they're a big moneymaker for us, but we would love to have more of our stuff in audio. So if AI or Apple can come up with a way that a text, the pure text from a book, can be generated into an audiobook without a lot of cost or stress for the author in that process, maybe that's a way we get some of our print books into audio.
So is there ways at the moment that you're using AI, whether it's in the promotion of your books or for writing your books? How do you personally use AI at the moment?
I don't use it a lot, to be honest. I use it some. There are some promotional things that will, set up a little avatar and, have a voice behind it that will point to your book. There's a lot of real innovative things that are going on in the marketing side with AI. I'm trying my best to at least dip my toe in the water and learn about them a little bit, but I'm not using them really very much.
I think certainly with decades of experience, you've got less need to rely on those than some other people might do it just starting out. So yeah, it's a good skill to keep up the traditional writing. In terms of Morgan James, a publishing house, what are some of their niches that you focus on? Do you have a niche? Is it a broad spectrum?
We are, like I say, we do 200 books a year, but we're the primary big area that we do are nonfiction trade books. So we do business, self-help, how-to, do a few memoirs, that kind of thing. We are led by Christians, so none of our books have any profanity or explicit sex in them. But we do have a line of Christian books that we publish. Morgan James Faith is that imprint. We do some novels, maybe 25, 30 novels a year. And we do a few children's books. It's really hard to find good children's books. Everybody thinks that children's books are easy. They'll read them to their kids and they say, well, my goodness, I could write this. Well, it's pretty hard actually to write a good 24 or 32 page children's book because it only uses a few words. It has to have the right illustration. Putting them together is a lot trickier than what people think on the surface there.
I wanted to move into now. It's just a few quick fire questions, which helps us get to know you a little bit more and some of the things that might have influenced you over your life and your career. And the first one I wanted to ask you about, can you think of one particular book that's had the biggest influence on you personally?
Well, that one book that ever had an influence on my life was that one I read as a sophomore in college, Jesus the Revolutionary. Changed the whole direction of my life. And that's part of what gets me up every day, John, and why I work in books, because books change people's lives. And I know that firsthand because years ago I read that book and it changed the direction of my life.
And like I say, I wanted one that was going to give the biggest influence on your life. And as you say, it's changed the direction of yours completely. So thank you for that recommendation. And do you have a particular daily habit that sets you up for the day?
Daily habit, I would say, I tend to get up pretty early. And so I for a number of years now. I do read consistently through the Bible. I spend time doing that. I have a gratitude journal where I write about things that I'm thankful for. So yeah, those daily habits do feed into my life and just sort of set my day up for what's ahead.
It's amazing how many people I speak to now that do the whole gratitude journaling. And is that something you've done for a long time?
I have. I heard about it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and so I started doing that on a daily basis, and it does sort of set my mind and my heart in the right direction.
Next question is kind of a two-parter, really. So what's one lesson about life that you wish you'd learned sooner?
I guess one lesson about life that I wish I'd learned sooner was to that I need to be. I'm responsible for myself at the end of the day, and I'm still learning this lesson, John. I mean, I have authors that come to me at Morgan James that I think, man, this is a great author. This is a great book. They should publish with us. So I go through all the work to get them a book contract, and then they think about it and they say, well, I'm not going to do that. And so I have to wish them all the best and hope that they come back for me later. But the lesson that I learned for myself over and over is that I can't control anybody else out there, what their decision is, where they're going to publish, what they're going to do. The only person that I can control is me. And so I can control my actions, what I'm going to say in response, what I'm going to do next. And I'm still learning this lesson because, to be honest, I'm disappointed with these people because I had great hopes for what was going to happen with them and with their book and how they'd help Morgan James and how I could help them, all that kind of stuff. And it just disappears when they say, well, we don't think it's the best fit, and they walk away.
No, I think most people can probably resonate with that. It's easy to if you're treated badly or somebody does something to upset you, it's easy to respond in the same manner. It is a difficult thing to actually be like, no, I'm in control of my reaction and I'm going to take responsibility for it. So it's a tough lesson to learn, but definitely one worth putting the effort into. And it's kind of a similar vein, the next question I wanted to ask, and it's around if there's one lesson about publishing that you wish you'd learned sooner.
Yeah, I guess the one lesson about publishing that I wish I'd learned sooner is that, I mentioned how we get rejected a lot. We get a lot of no's in the publishing world. It's been my privilege, John, to be in some of the top literary agencies and top publishing offices in New York City. I've been to those people. And the lesson that I learned from actually meeting with them is that all of them are reading their email, they're reading their physical mail, they're actively looking for the next bestseller, that diamond in the rough out there. So you may be getting no response, you may be getting ghosted by these people or getting form rejections. The lesson that I learned is that they are reading my material and they are actively looking for it. I'm actively looking for the next bestseller. That's why I have my personal email address in my X account. I want people to be able to reach me. In publishing, even though it's a communication business, a lot of us don't communicate, which is terrible, I think. So I try to be one of the most accessible people. I answer my email, I return my phone calls, just basic stuff. But I wish I'd learned it sooner that everybody's looking. They're actively looking for where that next diamond in the rough, the next bestseller is.
I think it's a lot of people ask themselves the wrong question or frame it like, what if they don't want to speak to me? What if they're going to reject me? But it's just flipping that on its head and being, what if they want to publish my book? What if they'd love to have that conversation with me? And it's just trying to flip that script a little bit. So that's another great answer. I wanted to give you one last opportunity. If there's one lesson that you would love for our listeners to walk away from this episode with, what would it be?
I'd like them to go away with the realization that we live in one of the greatest times in human history. I've heard Marcus Duhay, who just stepped back from being the chief executive officer at Penguin Random House, say that we live in one of the greatest times in human history since Gutenberg invented the printing press. I mean, there's lots of opportunity out there, but you have to do something to seize that opportunity. It doesn't just come into you. You have to be knocking on the doors. You have to be pitching. I mean, even for you and I to get together here for this podcast, I had to pitch you, that I would be a good guest. Why would I be a good guest? Well, it took a little work to do that. That's what all of us have to do in order to be able to do that. So we live in a world of opportunity. Just, I see the glass as half full rather than half empty. So seize that opportunity. It's right there for you. And I encourage you to do that every day.
Yeah, you said about having to pitch to be on here, and I'm really glad you did. So I'm appreciative of all the insights, the tips and tricks you've given us, and I'm sure there's a lot that our listeners can learn from it. So thank you for being here. I know that you've mentioned it already, but if anyone wants to grab Terry's book, he's got a special deal where you can get 10 publishing myths for just $10. Shipping's included, and I'll put all the links in the description as well. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, John, for the opportunity. I always love to talk about books and publishing, and thank you very much.
Thank you.